Hello, good evening, everybody. Hey, welcome to the Makeout Room. Welcome to the Litquake Literary Festival. Give yourselves a round of applause. You found parking. You're here. I'm Jack Bolwer from Litquake. I'm the co-founder. This is our 23rd year as San Francisco's Literary Festival, and this is the 15th day of Litquake. We have one more day after this, and so we're really glad you guys are here. We've got 100 events, 350 authors. Come out tomorrow if you want, if you're feeling frisky. We have a lit crawl that goes up and down the street here, 31 events in 3 hours. So tonight, we have The Only Truth is Music, readings from music writers, featuring Nadine Condon, Ben Fong-Torres, Michael Goldberg, Greil Marcus, Joel Selvin, Sylvie Simmons, and Rickey Vincent. All of them. If you threw a hand grenade into this room right now, you'd obliterate rock history, and funk history, and folk history. It is very strange that all of these people actually live in the Bay Area. There's something in the water. Rolling Stone was founded here. There's a lot of reasons, but and there are a lot more writers that are not on the bill tonight who live in the Bay Area. So, I don't know. It's just it's a really cool thing to be able to gather them all in one place. So, thank all of the authors for agreeing to do this. A few quick things before we begin. This evening is co-presented by KPFA Radio. She's there right in the back. She's in charge of their fundraising, so she may hit you up for some cash, but it's a good cause. Many thanks to everyone here at the Makeout Room, Adrian and Doug and Tom and everybody. Thank you guys for hosting us here. Thanks also to West Portal Books. They set up a bookstore in the back here, and they have books by every single author. And they're from West Portal, and they came a long way here, so come on. They drove here in the fog to sell books for you people. And there's a lot of new books here, new books that came out this year, so please browse and buy. That's why the authors wrote them. There are some audience surveys circulating around. If you fill those out, they're completely anonymous. They only help us in figuring out how to apply for grants to keep doing events like this. So we also want to thank this year's major sponsors of Litquake, the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Grants for the Arts. I love this, they're getting applause. Minor Anderson Foundation. No, okay, you don't know them. And the Brabson Library and Educational Foundation. Our first author tonight, they're going to be reading. This is all readings. This is just all this music history. You're going to be bombarded with it tonight. So our first reader is considered the Bay Area's godmother of rock. She worked in the 1980s music scene with the Jefferson Starship /Starship. That was some lawsuit a long time ago. And she's promoted artists like Melissa Etheridge, Steve Miller, and John Mayhall. And in the 90s, she launched the music festival Nadine's Wild Weekend. If you were here in the Bay Area, you remember a legendary San Francisco showcase of 135 bands, 30 shows, 20 clubs, and 4 nights. She lives in the Sonoma Valley and is the author of a new memoir. It's called Confessions, Stories to Rock Your Soul. Please welcome Nadine Condon.
Hi guys, now let's see. Let's make sure this is good. I need some technical help here. Just to make sure. How's that? Well, I'm so pleased to be kicking this off, and I just want to say thank you to Litquake. I admire this festival so much because it's really a truly and uniquely only in San Francisco activity. So Jack, thank you, and Jane Ganol, his co-conspirator who's not here. Give them both a real big round of applause. And I also want to thank my fellow authors who are going to be reading tonight. They're all my heroes too, and many of them are my friends, and I'm just honored to be on the same stage with them. So I read by taking off my glasses, and You know, it's always very convenient to have an Oakland Raiders Super Bowl ring to just hook my glasses onto. And if you want to know how I got that ring, you too can buy my book, Confessions, Stories. But tonight, because this is about music and not sports or other things, I'm going to read a part of my book called Portrait of an Icon. Everyone wants to know what the rock superstars I worked with were like off the stage. I could write reams about my love for the male members of Jefferson Starship. Vocally gifted, soulful Mickey Thomas. Phenomenal multi-genre guitarist Craig Chiquiso. Incredible multi-instrumentalist talent Pete Sears. Underrated cultural hero and musician David Freiberg. Impassioned, visionary and tribal leader Paul Kantner. Pulsating drummer-singer Donnie Baldwin. Renowned English drummer Ainsley Dunbar. I cherish my lifelong friendships with all these gentlemen. We traveled around the world together having fun adventures while achieving a third decade of commercial success for this iconic band. I'll never forget playing a cassette tape of our unreleased album, Knee Deep in the Hoopla, in the hotel bar after a gig in San Jose. We sang along full-throatedly while doing Tequila Shooters, hoping it would be a success. It sold over 1 million copies. Or the time Craig Chiquiso and vocalist Mickey Thomas and I were in a rental car after a gig in Florida. Tempted by the vastness of the parking lot, Craig started doing screaming wheelies, a fun pastime in rental cars, where you drove as fast as you could, then threw on the emergency brake and did a 180. Though we weren't close to any fans and there was no danger of hitting anyone, the erratic nature of our driving caused fans to panic and run away. And I could still see these fans just racing. When the SWAT police officers stopped us, pulling Craig out of the car to handcuff him, the first thing Mickey said was, "Don't hurt his hands, don't hurt his hands, he's our guitar player." Then there was the time David Freiberg got married on stage at an outdoor show in New York City. The marriage didn't last, but we got a windfall of publicity. Or when our daring leader, Paul Kantner, the one and only, got into a beef with a security guard who was hassling a young female fan in a concert in Ohio. Paul jumped off the stage and decked the cop. All hell broke loose after that show as the cops were racing around trying to find Paul. Luckily, he had been spirited away safely by our truck driver. Pete Sears and his wife, Jeanette Sears, remained close friends of mine, contributing songs to the band's repertoire while supporting political reform in Guatemala. I became close to all of the band's families and friends. They were a good substitute for my multitudinous family back in Kentucky. But it is the star of the show, the raven-haired beauty Grace Slick, who quietly impacted me. We weren't close friends, but we worked very well together during the 80s. I was never a buddy to her like I was with the guys. I'm sure I annoyed the heck out of her by treating her as the national treasure that she is. But Grace was the most professional celebrity I ever met. She was always on time and prepared for whatever the public promotional machine, me, asked of her. She was also the most closed off. The onus of celebrity always fell on her despite the talents of the rest of the band. Grace had a constant barrage of people grabbing at her, demanding her time, her attention, or fragments of her celebrity. Incessantly, relentlessly, always, always, always. I spent as much time surreptitiously being her bodyguard as her publicist. She managed these intrusions with either an icy, disdainful stare or her trademark acerbic humor, depending on the day. But if she committed to a PR event, she always brought her A game. Grace was mostly sober during the years we worked together, yet I saw the toll of the unyielding, constant pressures that fame took on her. I wasn't surprised she'd become a heavy drinker, yet I admired her resilience. Grace has a tough exterior cladding that protects a soft, squishy, whimsical heart. I have two memories that illuminate a different side of this rock icon. And the first were attending an extravagant Grammy party awards after the Grammys, hosted by RCA Records. The record label took over the entirety of a glittering upscale restaurant. There were tables overloaded with shrimp, steak, sushi, and other fancy eats. Waiters circulated with an endless supply of champagne. Many other RCA artists were there. Diana Ross, Mr. Bruce Hornsby, the Judds. After shaking hands and posing for pictures with record company executives, Grace wanted to leave. We walked to the elevator together so I could see her safely off in the limo. Who stepped into our descending mirrored lift but Diana Ross? She looked like a black Rapunzel with a halo of black flowing locks cascading on her shoulders. Diana was wearing a gown with a fitted, bejeweled silk bodice and an enormous bouffant skirt of stiff material. Her humongous skirt filled the entire cramped space. She showed no signs of recognizing Grace, who was in her mid-80s rock outfit. Black jacket, black pants, black boots. Grace's natural beauty notwithstanding, Diana was transcendent at that moment. While we stood in admiration, rather dazzled, Grace, who had once modeled couture at I Magnum downtown, said, "I'd love to be able to wear something like that." There was a tinge of yearning in her voice. Diana looked her up and down with a jaundiced eye, ready to dismiss her. But then her look softened. Diana said, "Well, maybe you could start with something simple. Maybe a simple long dress, trying to be helpful and kind." I loved Grace's wistfulness at that moment. Her look of longing at something so girly and so far outside her rock persona touched me. Haven't we all fantasized about having other looks, or maybe even other personas as life carries us onward? Certainly our choices put us in boxes of our own making. I felt there was so much more behind Grace's words, a deep longing perhaps to get off the rock and roll treadmill. Or maybe it was as simple as every woman wanting to be a princess once in a blue moon, even music icons. A similar memory comes from a concert at a Texas theme park. A hard afternoon rain had made the area between the outdoor stage and the dressing rooms a mud pit. Wooden boards were laid down to make a skinny catwalk through the bog. Grace was leery of traversing such a rickety, snaky path through the muck. She was uncertain how to proceed. Seeing her dilemma, our road manager picked her up in his arms and carried her the 50, 100 yards to the stage. She was momentarily, the 50 or 100 yards to the stage. She giggled like a teenager in his arms. Her face reflected unbridled glee and delight. Another sweet, girly reveal. She was momentarily treated as a female, and not just one of the guys running through the wet murk to the stage. For a woman who could quiet a rowdy crowd with a single, piercing look, this remains a welcome glimpse of another side of Grace Slick. Grace was smart and knew how to survive. She often commented that she didn't want to be jumping around on stage in her 50s singing rock and roll. She knew she had other talents she wanted to explore. While I didn't understand her sentiments in my 30s, I certainly came to a clear understanding of them in my 50s. What attracts us to music in our youth ceases to be as meaningful as we mature emotionally. Many of us outgrow the lure of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Grace eventually left her successful rock career on her own terms. She let her passion as a painter fuel a second career. Her example resonated with me. In time, I did the same thing. In my own way, loosely based on her playbook. I left a highly visible music career after discovering a passion for hospice work. I've never regretted that move.
Nadine Condon, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our next reader is, well, actually all of the writers who are here tonight are, this is, I don't know, I was talking with them earlier and it just, you have no idea the importance of, you know, before the internet era. Those of us who didn't live in the Bay Area and got to see all this cool music when we were kids, we had to read about it. And we read about it from all the journalism that all these people are here tonight. That's how we learned about it. So they're like culture communicators, really, you know? So they're saving lives for us out there and shoveling snow in the middle of the United States. So our next reader is an author, a music journalist, and a cultural critic. He's one of these people who poisoned my mind back in the 70s. He is notable for producing scholarly and literary essays that place rock music in a broader framework of culture. He has been a rock critic and columnist for many publications, including Rolling Stone, where he was the reviews editor at $30 a week. Jesus. Yawn. Come on, cough it up. He is the author of many books, including Mystery Train, Lipstick Traces, and Invisible Republic, and this year he releases 2 new books, More Real-Life Rock, The Wilderness Years, 2014 to 2021, and Folk Music, a Bob Dylan biography in 7 songs. It's a huge privilege to have him at Litquake. Please welcome Greil Marcus.
Spent the summer in the hospital, and as you can see, I'm a little feeble, but I'm doing my best to come back to the world. This book and I want to thank Jack, I want to thank people at the Makeout Room, I want to thank all my fellow writers. It's a privilege to be here. Now this book is called Folk Music, and I'm not going to go through the whole idea of the book. I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book, and then a little bit from the last chapter, the last of the 7 songs. We'll see how it goes. I can see myself in others, Bob Dylan said in Rome in 2001. Speaking to a crowd of journalists, and if there's a key to his work from the start to now, that may be it. The engine of his songs is empathy, the desire and the ability to enter other lives, even to restage and reenact dramas others have played out in search of different endings. I once wrote a song about Emmett Till in the first person, pretending to be him, Bob Dylan said in 1964 to a friend. Writing a song called The Death of Robert Johnson, he said in 1962 to the same man. And you can see him trying to convince whoever might have been listening in the Gaslight Cafe on any given night that he knew what he was talking about. That because, as he would say of Robert Johnson years later, he was someone who's telling me where he's been that I haven't, and what it's like there. Somebody whose life I can feel. He was talking as if he had the right to sing as a black boy who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955, just as he had the right to sing as a blues singer who was poisoned by a jealous husband in Mississippi in 1938. Pretending to be him, maybe both at once. Since the day it was released, after Bob Dylan put the song on his website and saw it spread everywhere across the internet before May 27th, 2020 turned into May 28th, every few weeks I find myself playing Murder Most Foul. I can never play it less than 3 times in a row. Every time it seems to carry more weight. The opening lines, "It was a dark day in Dallas, November '63, still sound pumped up and fake like Vincent Price reciting The Raven. But it's only seconds later that you realize, and it can be a shock every time, that you're listening into John F. Kennedy's brain after the president for 5 seconds has been shot, but before he's killed, arguing with his assassins as if there's still time to talk them out of it. I saw some of myself in him, Bob Dylan said of Lee Harvey Oswald on December 13th, 1963, at a dinner held by the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee in New York, accepting their Tom Paine Award. He said, "I saw things that he felt in me, and he was booed and he was hissed. It was that gift or that compulsion for empathy for those sitting before him taken many steps too far." And with Murder Most Foul, Dylan exchanged roles, putting on Kennedy's bloody suit, coming back from that first bullet with the reply of the entitled, speaking as he imagined doing for Emmett Till, as John F. Kennedy, "Wait a minute, boys, do you know who I am?" And that voice, that argument going on all through the song, across its 17 minutes, which always seemed to stop short, as the singer calls to Wolfman Jack, dead since 1995, to play that only the good die young. He wants to hear St. James Infirmary, Tom Dooley, I'd Rather Go Blind, Cry Me a River, Down in the Boondocks, One Night of Sin, Deep in a Dream, with Kennedy's dialogue with hate still running. Isn't there more for that DJ in the sky to play on his hydrogen jukebox? You do pay lacrosse, don't you? And who said I had to get off the line? Just write it down. Pay Big Bill Brunzi's Just a Dream. That I dreamed I was in the White House sitting in the president's chair. I dreamed he's shaking my hand, saying, "Bill, I'm so glad you're here." Play Lou Reed. You play that. I dreamed I was the president of the United States. I dreamed the perfect union and a perfect law, undenied. And most of all, I dreamed I forgot the day John Kennedy died. And just getting started. We're just getting started. We're going to go all night. Wolfman Jack, as the monk of the world of the song, holed up in his monastery of XERB radio just over the Mexican border, taunting the FCC with his 250,000 watts of power and with the only copy of every song that Murder Most Foul wants to play. All the seemingly obligatory lines, the soul of a nation has been torn away, fade into the hard-boiled, the why oh why of what is the truth and where did it go, running straight into Ask Oswald and Ruby, they ought to know. In 1968, in an interview in Sing Out, Bob Dylan explained Murder Most Foul. The thing about the ballad, he said, is that you have to be conscious of the width of it at all times in order to write one. You could take a true story and write it up as a ballad, or you can write it up in 3 verses. The difference would be, what are you singing it for? What is it to be used for? The uses of a ballad have changed to such a degree. When they were singing years ago, a fellow sorry. I'm sorry. When they were singing years ago, a fellow could sit down and sing a song for half an hour, and everybody could listen, and you could form opinions. Everybody could listen, and you could form opinions. In many ways, the true story of the song was in the noise around it, the explosion of have you heards, the what do you thinks from all over the world, from people you never imagined would want to talk about a Bob Dylan song. It was recorded in February 2020 with the shadow of disease hanging over the world, but before the country had shut down. But it felt like the world had been waiting for this song since 1963 without knowing it. Even people not born in 1963 were waiting for it, because 1963 was not only a time, but because of what happened in that year, it was also an idea. It was a friend saying, you want to play it over and over. It's so beautiful. But this is death. This is about now. This is about the virus. He thinks he's going to die. Think of how he lives in an airplane all the time, smoking. This could be the last Bob Dylan song. And I wonder what Stevie Nicks thinks of being in there. Everybody else he names is dead. Thank you.
Greil Marcus, everyone. Beautiful. So we have 2 more readers, and then we're going to take a short intermission, and then we'll come back with more, just to let you guys know. You'll have time. So let's see. This is great. It's so great to meet him tonight. Our next reader is an author, music scholar, and radio host, and he writes and speaks on issues of race, culture, music, and politics nationwide. He is author of the award-winning Funk, The Music, the People, and the Rhythm of the One, and Party Music, the inside story of the Black Panthers band and how Black Power transformed soul music. Since 1997, he has hosted the History of Funk on KPFA Radio. 2 hours of the strongest, stankiest, uncut funk anywhere on the airwaves. Please welcome Rickey Vincent.
Oh boy, how's everybody doing? All right, ready to get on down. I want to thank Litquake and all the folks involved for letting me sort of sneak in and make a mess of things. Yeah, 1997. That's when I got the show that I have now, but I was doing radio before that because back around 1977, I got zapped by that bolt of purple funkadelic lightning and became a funketeer for life. And George Clinton and crew landed the mothership at the Oakland Coliseum, and it's all over. And that's in chapter 17 if you want to read about it. But then I started to just hold these ideas of how and why this music happened together, and eventually started to write about it. And the reason I'm giving you this history is this book, it's there, it's for sale. Nice. It was published in 1996, and it's still in print, and it's pretty much still relevant. Even though I did write an update, but St. Martin's didn't want to publish it, so it's still here with a 25-year-old bio for, doesn't list my kids yet, that type of thing. But at some point, funk has to be discussed in the moment anyway. And part of talking about the stanky is fun. I learned early on, if you're going to describe this stuff, you can't do it with the detachment of a scholar or even a scribe. You have to inhabit the stuff. So it took a moment to take on sort of the slang and dialect of what a funketeer is about to write this. So I'm going to read like the first few pages of the book, and you'll understand. I remember doing this a few years ago, going back and was like, I said those things? I wrote like that? But it was part of a method of inhabiting the funk, okay? And real quick, I want to acknowledge Ann Powers. Most of y'all, if you know music writers, you know her. She gave me my first break in writing for money. I was at Calex Radio, and all my friends were getting jobs, and I was like, how come I don't get to write anything? And finally, she called. She was the music editor at the SF Weekly back when there was free music magazines. And she asked me if I would write a review of this new album, Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy. And she said, I don't feel qualified to talk about something like that. And that was my opening. And in that sense, I'm happy for hip hop for giving me an opportunity. I'm happy for Ann Powers for giving me an opportunity. And actually, everything she does, I stop in my tracks and read it. And yesterday she posted a review of, what's her name? The rock pop country star? Taylor Swift. She posted a review of Taylor Swift. I went and listened to the whole Taylor Swift album because of Ann Powers. So I just want to acknowledge her for keeping my vistas open like that. The funk, chapter 1, Introduction to Funk, the bomb. If you got funk, you got class. You're out on the floor moving your ass. That's funkadelic. That's your epigraph. Just so you know what you're about to get into. All right, we'll just go. What is funk? Funk is a many-splendored thing. Funk is a nasty vibe and a sweet, sexy feeling. Funk is funkiness. a natural release of the essence within. Funk is a high, but it's also down at the bottom, the low down earthy essence, the base elements. Funk is at the extremes of everything. Funk is hot, but funk can be cool. Funk is primitive, yet funk can be sophisticated. Funk is a way out and a way in. Funk is all over the place. Funk is a means of release that cannot be denied. Village Voice writer Barry Walters explained the funk as well as anyone could. He writes, "Trying to put that thing called funk into words is like trying to write down your orgasm. Both thrive in that gap in time when words fall away, leaving nothing but sensation. Funk is impossible to completely describe in words, yet we know the funk when we see it. Funk is that low down, dirty dog feeling that pops up when that bad funk jam gets to the heated part, and you forget about that contrived dance you were trying, and you get off your ass and jam. Funk is that geeked feeling that comes over you when a superstar steps into the room, like Grace Slick, or onto the stage, and everyone is hyped. The funk hits you in competition when that last shot you made was your best, yet you still dig down for that extra level for the overdrive that you didn't know was there. You know the funk when you're on a date and it's time to make your move. The funk is a rush that comes all over your body. Scientists have yet to discover that particular funk gland, but rest assured there are plenty of bodily excretions associated with it. Funk is that nitty-gritty thing that affects people when things get heavy. Funk can be out of control, like the chaos of a rebellion, or instinctively elegant, like that extended round of lovemaking that hits overdrive. Funk is what you say when nothing else will do. When you've done all you can and there's nothing else, funk it. George Dr. Funkenstein Clinton, the most heralded authority of funk philosophy, reduced to funk to its barest essence. Funk is whatever it needs to be at the time that it is. Someone funky looking is generally thought of as someone colorful and amusing, yet unkempt, undisciplined, somewhere between exotic and ridiculous. Whether or not funky is in style, there are funky looking people everywhere. Quite often these funky people are self-styled, creative, and in touch with themselves. Funkiness then is an earthy sense of self that is free of inhibitions and capable of tapping instincts and celebrating the human condition in all its forms. Funkiness is a way of life. Funkiness in a person's behavior or attitudes can mean anything from an ego trip to a protest to escapism. Funkiness is much more than a style, it's a means to a style. While baggy pants, noise rings, and a hip-hop swagger are often little more than fashion statements, the combination of far out and all in, the juxtaposition of what is in and what is not yet in, the original ensemble that is the postmodern person, particularly the postmodern African American, is how people use funkiness as a guide to their uniqueness. Remember, this was made in 1995. Okay? Funkiness for our purposes is an aesthetic of deliberate confusion, of uninhibited soulful behavior that remains viable because of a faith in instinct, a joy of self, and a joy of life, particularly unassimilated Black American life. The Black popular music of the early 70s was a consistent reminder of this new, affirming, colorful ethnic aesthetic, and the hip-hop culture of the 1990s has spawned a return to this less formalized foundation of life. Good old days. One more section. Why a book about funk? Because this is the first of its kind, if you don't know. And I also want to recognize Greil Marcus, his chapter on Sly Stone, and his epic book got me started, made me realize you can take a deep dive with these artists, especially these 70s artists that somehow got missed with all the hoopla of the 60s, the crises of the 80s, the 70s. Leave it there. Why a book about funk? There are many aspects of the funk that are intimately tied to an African value system that has been propagated through black culture since the Middle Passage. Funk is deeply rooted in African cosmology, the idea that people are created in harmony with rhythms of nature and that free expression is tantamount to spiritual and mental health. If we look into this African philosophy, the African roots of rhythm, spiritual openness with the cosmos, and a comfort zone with sex and aspects of the body, we would find that funkiness is an ancient and worthy aspect of life. Thus, funk in its modern sense is a deliberate reaction to and rejection of the traditional Western world's predilection for formality, pretense, and self-repression. In traditional Western society, the maintenance of rationality, civility, and pomp with deliberate disregard and disdain for the natural urges of the body and soul has become a goal unto itself. The influx of technology has in many ways provided a further impetus for most Westerners to obsess with the aesthetics of curbing their instincts. One of Toni Morrison's characters in The Bluest Eye looks at the situation facing upstanding white Americans. She writes, "They learn how to behave, the careful development of thrift, patience, high morals, and good manners. In short, how to get rid of the funkiness. The dreadful funkiness of passion, the funkiness of nature, the funkiness, the whole range of human emotion. Wherever it erupts, this funk, they wipe it away. Where it crests, they dissolve it. Wherever it drips, flowers, or clings, they find it and fight it until it dies. They fight this battle all the way to the grave." That's Toni Morrison. This, one little section more. This vengeance against nature is also manifest in the obsessively cruel and sexually violent treatment of blacks by whites throughout American history. The thousands of public lynchings, castrations, burnings, and Klan terrorism are grounded in the planet's most hysterical legacy of race hate. This has, of course, perpetuated the social repression of blacks and their self-expressive virtues, among them jazz, the Caribbean carnival, bebop, and the funk. It is the funk which has provided the modern musical backdrop and forum for explicit confrontations with the vicious racial legacy in America. In addition, the implicit nature of the funk, its inherent nastiness, which cannot help but drive people closer to their funky soul, peels off the veneer of pretense and exposes the unpackaged self for all to see. Just as rock and roll began the sexual liberation of America in the 1950s, it is the funk that drives the soundtrack for American sexuality of the 1990s. Smooth bass. Part of the affirmation of the human condition in America is the acceptance of the funk as a music, as a lifestyle, and as a grassroots philosophy of self-development. One more paragraph. One more paragraph. I lose it. Aspects of black folks' funkiness are ultimately what has fueled mainstream American culture and made it distinct from the culture in any other Western nation. One might even claim that it is the funky nature of black Americans that is the salvation of this nation. The psychologist Alfred Pasteur and Ivory Tolson position the funk in its proper place. And they write, "Thus we could say that funk rests at the root and stem of popular culture in America. From beneath the arms, the crotch, a sensuously fragrant, musky perfume has arisen, activating an effective force that provides for life enjoyment, enrichment, and regeneration. It is the most natural force in the universe." There we go.
Vincent, everybody. Wow. So how many people have ever seen the P-Funk live? A version of it, yeah? It was like 5 hours, wasn't it? Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so our next reader is an old friend of Litquake. He is an American rock journalist, author, and broadcaster, best known for his association with Rolling Stone and the San Francisco Chronicle. He has published 11 books on subjects ranging from Graham Parsons to The Doors, Grateful Dead, The Eagles, and Little Feat. He is currently a DJ and program director for the online station Moon Alice Radio, and on Netflix right now. It's great. You should check it out. You can catch the award-winning documentary about his life and career. Like a Rolling Stone, the life and times of Ben Fong-Torres. Please welcome Ben Fong-Torres.
Calm down. Christ, what's going on here? Well, first, thanks to Jack and also to Jane and Litquake for this latest festival. Thanks to everybody involved with it, including my fellow writers, and especially thanks to you for being out there reading and buying and appreciating. It's all appreciated.
We love you, Ben!
Diane. Since I remember nothing anymore, I'm going to read even my most casual opening remarks. Very sad. About 5 years ago, I got one of the biggest shocks of my life when Diane and I attended a preview at the Castro Theater. It was an HBO special for Rolling Stone magazine's 50th anniversary. I had spoken with the producer about my 1971 feature on Ike and Tina Turner. I had no idea how they might use it, if at all. But for this 4-part documentary, Stories from the Edge, the producers mixed music with material from the magazine. And early on, there it was, my article. The lead describing Ike and Tina's sprawling living room in Inglewood was being read by the actor Jeff Daniels. And they'd show film footage matching my descriptions. They brought in Ike and Tina performance footage, and in between song segments, Jeff would read what I wrote about them. My words would scroll across the big screen. It was so strange seeing this treatment of words I had long forgotten that I dashed out and banged out on deadline. Well, if it's good enough for HBO, it should be good enough for Litquake. And to prove I'm not lying, let's see if this works out. And I'll play the opening. Adrian will play the opening, and I'll be adding bits and pieces from the article since the producers moved stuff around. And Adrian, here's Jeff Daniels.
As with Ike and Tina Turner, that becomes the lead. Walk into what, from the outside, looks to be another well-paid, well-kept home in suburban Inglewood, California, and you're hit. The huge imperial oil painting of Ike and Tina Turner dressed as if for a simple private wedding circa 1960. Also in the foyer, under the portrait, a small white bust of John F. Kennedy. Next to him, the Bible. Over in the family room, splashing, programmed, there's a waterfall. There's a red velvet sofa designed around a coffee table in the shape of a bass guitar. Tina's not back. Half an hour late.
Thank you, Jeff. Well read.
You were there!
In the article, I follow by listing a few books in the corner bookshelf, including novels like Andromeda and Cheever's Bullet Park, along with How to Make a Killing on Real Estate and The Sex Book. And Jeff Daniels continued my description. The world's greatest heartbreaker drives up in her Mercedes sedan and strides in all fresh and breezy in a red knit hot pants outfit, third button unbuttoned, supple legs, still very firm, very, very trim at age 32. 1971, baby. charging onto 33. So on video, they charge on and perform the classic River Deep Mountain High, and then Jeff narrates from my article. To hear that song for the first time in 1967, the first year of acid rock and Memphis soul, to hear that wall falling toward you with Tina teasing it along, is to understand the power of rock and roll. After River Deep bombed, Ike Turner said the Phil Spector production didn't get airplay because the soul station said too pop and the white station said too R&B. See, what's wrong with America is that rather than accept something for its value, America mixes race in it. What finally carried the Ike and Tina Turner through was the 1969 Rolling Stones tour, where the review broke out with Come Together in its own raw style. Tina snapping across the stage, punching out the John Lennon lyrics. Someone once called Tina the female Mick Jagger. To be more accurate, one should call Mick the male Tina Turner. Then they played from a cassette of mine. I'm asking Tina, what was the first connection with the Stones? And Tina says, the time we cut River Deep Mountain High, Mick was around. Mick, I guess, thought the record was great, and he caught our act a couple of times. Mick wasn't dancing at the time. He always said he liked to see girls dance. So he was excited about our show, and he thought it'd be different for the people in England. Then I'm on cassette still. This is a weird question, but did you have any kind of a rush of excitement when you discovered there was a whole new kind of a culture that was a ready audience for you? Tina answers on tape. The hippies came. They just took over. That was the beginning of the change. They changed the world. They changed minds. They said, well, why? And that's who accepted us. They felt like, why dress up? Why is it that a woman can't wear short skirts or whatever? Why is it that Tina Turner isn't as good as the Supremes? Because you're of this, would it be culture? And the hippies would say, why? It's class. Jeff continues to read. The move to interpreting white rock and roll, she says, was quite natural. Tina on tape. My mother, her radio was usually blues, B.B. King and all, but rock and roll was more me. And when that music came on, I never could sit down, and I always wanted to move. And Jeff reads my writing. On stage, there may be reason to compare Tina Turner to Mick Jagger. Tina, in fact, is more aggressive or animalistic, but it is indeed a stage. My whole thing, she once said, is the fact that I am to Ike, I'm going to use the term doll, that you could sort of mold. Tina has given me a tour of Ike's new main studios. There's a double-door air closet at the entrance to Ike's private quarters. Tina turns to Ike and says, can I tell him what we call this room? We call it the whorehouse. I asked an ex-Ikette about Ike Turner and sex. Sex? Oh my God, that's another volume, she said. I'll have to get a cigarette on that one. Last winter, Tina was sick with bronchial pneumonia, 104 degrees, in the hospital with her body ice-packed to bring the temperature down. And Ike was visiting, and he was going, you get out and sing, or you get out of the house. Tina on tape. Ike and I have problems sometimes, and we stay mad at each other sometimes. It's hard to put it into words, but I have to do what he says. Ike and Tina, when they do an interview together, invariably, they disagree and chide each other. Posing for a photo, Ike is asked to embrace Tina. He does and warns, better catch this quick, I don't do this often. The actual end of the article has Ike Turner talking about installing more cameras and cable lines between his private studios and the Inglewood house so that he can keep an eye out on his family and on Tina. And HBO chose, probably wisely, to leave out my quotes of a record industry pal of Ike Turner's, who joked about his decorating sense. He did that living room, saying he got a tour and asked Turner, "You mean you actually can spend $70,000 at Woolworths?" Remember Woolworths? This buddy also recalled Ike's first cocaine purchase, $3,000, he said, for a fucking Drano. Months after the piece ran, an editorial assistant came over to my office at Rolling Stone and asked if I'd recently had a broken arm or leg. Turns out the police had a guy in custody on a dope bust, and he was trying to reduce charges with some information that he had been hired by Ike Turner to come to San Francisco and break one limb each. His choice of Jan Wenner and me. And years later, Tina would break free and tell her story in a book, I, Tina. This is a wild guess, but I think that Ike did not add it to his corner bookshelf. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fong-Torres, everybody. What a story. Holy shit. We're going to take a short intermission, just like 5 or 10 minutes or so. Please browse the books, browse the bar, and we'll be back with some more readings about punk rock and soul music in the second half. Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second half of the show. We have Michael Goldberg, Joel Selvin, and Sylvie Simmons still to come. I don't know if you no, thank you. Yeah, I did a book about the Bay Area punk rock history some years back. I've never read from it, and I thought, I don't know, if you guys are okay with it, I might read like a page or two of the funny stuff, the interesting stuff. Okay, it's for sale back there too. It's called Gimme Something Better. And my friend Silka and I, we both wrote for SF Weekly. Rickey and Ann Powers, all these people used to write for SF Weekly back in the day. And yeah, we interviewed like 300 people in the punk scene from the 70s through the end of the 90s, and it ended up a book. And I'm going to read just the first part of it, where we asked all the people in the earliest part of the punk scene here in San Francisco what music they hated. And this is what they said. Howie Klein from 415 Records. There was this hideous interlude of corporate rock where their cool Yardbirds turned into Led Zeppelin, and suddenly there was Journey in Kansas and REO Speedwagon, just all this pure garbage. Jello Biafra, the Dead Kennedys. 99.9% of the population listened to Elton John and Saturday Night Fever. In a way, that music was a major influence on it because we hated it so much. Dave Dichter from the band MDC. I couldn't go see Marshall Tucker one more time. Allman Brothers, Grateful Dead, The Who, yes. That arena rock, it was just numbing. You felt like an ant with 40,000 other people, and you really felt disconnected from what was going on. Max Volume from the Naked Lady Wrestlers. Journey, they were one of the worst. James Stark, early photographer. Jefferson Starship, all that kind of shit. Genesis. Roz Rezebek from Negative Trend. Boston, Toto, REO Speedwagon, Air Supply, Michael Murphy's Wildfire. Jennifer Miro from the band The Nuns. I was in this horrible band in Mill Valley and we did Doobie Brothers songs. I had to sing China Grove. It was the lowest point of my life. Joe Reese from Target Video. Anything disco, that type of music was part of a big corporate ripoff. It was threatening to take everyone's mind away. Penelope Houston from The Avengers. It looked like 1973. People were dressed in bell-bottoms and long hair and stuff like that. Ray Farrell from Rather Ripped Records in Berkeley. There was a radio show on KPFA called Music from the Hearts of Space. Really fucking aggravating. Sorry, KPFA. Steve DePace from the band Flipper. Corporate rock bands of the day like Air Supply and Journey, the Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan, Rush. These bands were technically superb. If you were a 15-year-old kid listening to that, you were going, how do I do that? I just want to be in a band with my buddies and play. Klaus Fluoride from the Dead Kennedys. When people say, what got you into punk? I say, the Eagles. Nothing in the mainstream that was calling itself rock and roll was really rock and roll. It was easy listening music at that point. East Bay Ray, Dead Kennedys. The music I really hated the most was fusion jazz. Klaus Fluoride. I hated fusion opera, even worse. East Bay Ray. I think that's called musicals. Klaus Fluoride. I think it's called Yes. I had a dream that I was a roadie for Asia one time. I don't know what the hell that was about. So that's how the book opens. Thank you. Okay, and our next reader actually reviewed this book in the San Francisco Chronicle, and he wasn't mean to us, so that was pretty cool. The thing about, if you do a punk rock book, somebody told me this, if you do a punk rock book and everybody likes it, it's not a punk rock book. I'm used to it. So our next reader started covering rock shows for the San Francisco Chronicle shortly after the end of the Civil War. His writing has appeared in a surprising number of other publications that you would think should have known better. He has written more than 20 books covering various aspects of pop music, and his newest book is Sly and the Family Stone, an oral history. Please welcome San Francisco Chronicle pop music critic Joel Selvin.
Jack Poolwar. I was around the Chronicle at Date Book when they did the first Litquake, and Jane Ganal, Jack's partner, was working at Date Book at that time. And I remember thinking it was a really cute idea. One and done. 23 years later. And you know what blows my mind? It blows my mind to be out in a nightclub in the Mission District with a whole bunch of people that are sitting here listening to people that write about music read it aloud. I can't believe you guys are here. Thank you. It's a dream come true. And of course, here I am tonight with just, my favorite esteemed colleagues, all of them. It's just, this is a great night. I'll remember this one forever, and thank you for coming. So, as Jack said, my new book is a Sly and the Family Stone book. It's actually a reissue. You're welcome to pick up a copy. Don't read it too late at night. It's a real scary little nightmare, and but it's an oral history. And the last time I was here was like 4 or 5 years ago, and I was working on a book, and I took the opportunity to read the opening chapter of that book. So it worked out really well for me. It was called Hollywood Eden. And it felt really good to try out a chapter. So I'm working on another book, sorry about that. And I'd try out the opening chapter. Okay, here we go. It's Santa Monica, 1983. Jim Gordon looked nothing like the swashbuckling rock star drummer who backed Eric Clapton in Derek and the Dominoes. He sported an additional 40 or 50 pounds. His curly blonde locks had been cut short and lost their golden luster. His piercing cat eyes had dulled, no longer twinkling or sparkling. Few people in the desultory Monday night crowd knew his distinguished background and would have been astonished to learn that the tall, pudgy drummer squeezed behind his kit on the tiny stage walked with kings. Gordon had not been playing music for several years when he fell in with these fellows who called themselves the Blue Monkeys. They were aspiring young musicians on their way up, and they knew who Gordon was when he asked to sit in with the band at some unlikely weeknight gig at a Pico Boulevard club. They were astonished when he offered to take the place of the band's regular drummer, who was quitting. Their regular weekly date was Monday night at O'Mahony's, a long-standing Irish bar on Main Street in Santa Monica, a few blocks from the Pacific Ocean. Opened in 1941 by a professional wrestler named Dan O'Mahony, known as the Irish Whip, who died in a 1950 car crash in his native Ireland. The bar long outlived O'Mahony. Cheap beer, free pool, live music every night, and no cover. A horseshoe bar served the room, grouchy older Johnny tending bar on one side, and a more genial Irish lass named Gracie on the other. The pool tables on the right side of the room, and the small stage on the left, with about a dozen tables in front. On a good night, as many as 40 or 50 people crowded in to hear music. Gordon had put aside music for the past 4 years as he bounced in and out of mental hospitals, struggling with demons and fighting for his life. He'd spent endless days and nights holed up in his North Hollywood apartment, unable to venture out further than the neighborhood liquor store. He was in the grip of terrifying madness. His bandmates knew nothing of his condition. They knew his professional reputation. They heard his playing. That was all they needed to know. They thought he was unusually quiet, reserved, and taciturn, and not everybody saw him gulping down vodka and tonics between sets or snorting a little bit of cocaine on the side. But nobody suspected anything was out of order with Jim. He coiled himself behind a small regulation 4-piece drum kit on a stage so crowded that bassist Rolly Sally had to thread the neck of his bass between Jim's cymbal stands. Night after night, Rolly would stand over Jim's drums while he played and lose himself in Jim's mastery of his kit. He never bashed his drums. Rarely lifted his arms, in fact. Everything was in the wrist. Brain to wrist direct. He never raised the volume, but his playing would grow wider and lift the whole band. He could orchestrate the sound from the drum stool. In the center of his snare, his sticks left marks in a circle no bigger than a quarter. Pete Emerson played guitar, sang, and told bad jokes. He was from Detroit, but he'd been kicking around Los Angeles for 10 years, scuffling, trying to make something happen. Bassist Rolly Sally came to town 4 years before from Woodstock, New York, where he had played with old folkies like Artie and Happy Trom. Keyboardist John Heron was a prickly character and an accomplished musician who had been on the scene since his brief stint with the Electric Croons almost 15 years before. He lived off a trust fund and never worked much, although he always had good gear, nice clothes, and a house in the valley. The band did raucous old rock and roll, Little Richard, Fats Domino, New Orleans R&B, nothing too trendy or fancy. When Jim slipped behind the drum kit, they began to take themselves more seriously. Jim was all business. He showed up for work with his drums in the back of his Mercedes. His kit was nothing special, an ordinary 4-piece Camco set. He came alone and didn't bring any girlfriends. He wore flannel shirts, jeans, and tennis shoes, and played 4 sets a night for $30. Triple scale sessions were long in the past. On breaks, he was remote, almost standoffish. He didn't talk about the past, but he elevated everybody's chops in the band. His timekeeping was magical, and he never, ever overplayed. It was all about the music. Jim treated the music like a job, punctual for gigs and rehearsals, pitched in loading equipment, acted like another band member. He didn't display any signs of the cocktails he furtively slurped down between sets until the end of the night, when sometimes his eyes showed the fatigue. His playing never faltered. His bandmates didn't know about the residential treatment programs, the pharmaceutical carpet bombing, his desperate battle for control of his life, and tenuous grip on reality. They hadn't heard any of the rumors floating around Hollywood from years before. Nobody suspected anything. Jim put on a mask and went to work. He needed the music. It was not only what he had done all his life, it was what it did for him. With sticks in his hands, feet on the pedals, the drums transported Jim somewhere he was safe and secure, somewhere the demons couldn't follow. There were occasional odd moments the other guys couldn't understand, like the night some of them went to dinner after rehearsing at John Heron's house in Van Nuys. Unlike the struggling musicians at the table with him, Jim felt comfortable ordering a nice, juicy steak for himself. When it arrived, he cut a bite and raised it to his mouth on the fork, only to hold it there, his hand wavering, before throwing the fork down on the plate. He hurriedly stood, tossed a $20 bill on the table. "I've got to go," he said. As he rushed out of the restaurant, his bandmates sat there wondering what just happened. The Blue Monkeys began to attract a modest following at O'Mahony's, not the in-crowd or hip scene. Santa Monica was a million miles from Hollywood, but a nice neighborhood bunch that showed up week after week. They were beach bums and English expats, a heavy beer-drinking crew, and not a lot of pretty girls. A serious dive bar crowd that spilled out on the sidewalk, smoking and drinking in the warm Southern California nights. They started to add original material to their bar band covers. Nobody in the band was a gifted writer. Heron had a few original songs and picked up "She Loves My Car" from his pal, songwriter Moon Martin, a songwriter named Michael Smotherman, who had written some songs Glenn Campbell recorded, gave them tunes, including "Baby Talkin'," which Rolly sang. Pete did the old Otis Clay soul song, "Trying to Live My Life Without You." They had no management. There was no business strategy or career direction. Pete made the phone calls and handled the details. They were serious about playing music, learning their instruments, practicing, and rehearsing, but they were not driven by professional ambition. Having Jim in the band had only made them concentrate on honing their skills even more. Still, they went into the Annex Studio in Hollywood, the former Radio Recorders where Elvis cut Jailhouse Rock, and knocked out a 4-song demo live in the studio, no overdubs. It wasn't lost on Pete and Rolly that they were tracking with Jim Gordon. The music hardly challenged Jim. His playing was relaxed, restrained, and unobtrusively embedded in the band. It wasn't like the demanding symphonic work he did for Frank Zappa, or the polyphonic New Orleans grooves he laid down for Johnny Rivers, or the high drama of Beach Boys records, let alone the monumental thunder of George Harrison or Derek and the Dominoes sessions. It was more like the work that teenage Jim did with the Everly Brothers. Set the groove and hold it, keep decorations to a minimum, drive the band, shape the sound, pump the pulse. It was not simply less is more, but something more zen. The exact right stroke at the exact right time. That was Jim's gift. He heard the music in the drums. The drums anchored Jim's world. The rackety report resounding through his body, the fire bell clanging of the cymbals, the hypnotic rhythmic entrainment of the mighty groove, they silenced his unquiet mind, focused his entire being on driving the big beat, and submerged him in the world the rhythm opened. These drums had been at the center of his life since he was a child, and through the drums, Jim could speak freely without the interference of the chattering inside his head. He knew the many languages of the drum, and he spoke them all fluently. When he was playing, he was free and fully alive, centered and assured. It wasn't like that for Jim when he stopped playing. Nobody knew the dread of those hours in his life when he wasn't playing drums. He had few friends. He kept to himself and spent long, lonely times alone in his 2-bedroom apartment, drinking and playing piano into the endless night. For Jim to take the bandstand again and sit behind his drum kit was a miraculous act of rebellion against powerful, evil forces that were quite literally driving him crazy. Every day was a battle. Pete Anderson wrangled Jim to play a casual at Knott's Berry Farm and was quietly astonished when they heard a Merle Haggard record and Jim mentioned that he was playing the drums. Pete really had no idea how deep Jim's career went. He put together Jim Rowley and John Heron to back a singer-songwriter named Teresa Tate on her showcase. There was a little money involved, and Jim went along to help the other guys make a couple of bucks. The music was nothing special, something Jim could have handled in his sleep, but he seemed especially distracted this afternoon, on the edge of agitated. The band took a break, and Jim made Pete go out in the front yard to talk. Now fully agitated, Jim was huffing and puffing through his nose, his cheeks flaring. "I've got to go see my doctor," he told Pete, "right now." Pete knew nothing about any doctor. Before he could unshrug his shoulders, Jim was gone, in a flash. Now you see him, now you don't. That was the last time they laid eyes on him. A month later, he was in jail.
Joel Selvin, everybody. When is the new book out, Joel? When is it due? Okay. Mark your calendars. Fair enough. So, given that, you can go buy a book in the back that Joel wrote that has absolutely nothing to do with what he just wrote. It's right there for sale. And we'll have him for the next one, of course. So our next reader, we're moving right along. We only have 2 people left. Our next reader was born in London and moved to Los Angeles in the late 1970s to write about rock music for magazines like Sounds, Cream, Kerrang! And Mojo. She is an award-winning music journalist and author of several best-selling books, including the biographies of Leonard Cohen, Serge Gainsbourg, and most recently Debbie Harry. She is also a singer-songwriter and recording artist on the ukulele. We should have had her do that tonight. Her most recent album is Blue on Blue. So great to have her. She also lives right here in San Francisco. Sylvie Simmons.
Van Halen jumping there from my dodgy metal past. Well, I've atoned because I wrote Leonard Cohen's biography, and we did talk about metal once in a while, but not too often. It actually came out in 2012, but obviously some people didn't think that 600 pages was enough, so I've written another chapter and there's an update. And the sad thing is it takes us up to Leonard's death, which at least one bit of cheer that he actually died the day before Trump was voted in. So he always had perfect timing in every way as far as I'm concerned. So these are a few excerpts from the final chapter, and I guess to put it in context, these came when the book was finished, or at least the manuscript was in the hands of the evil publishers. And he had just finished his tour, I just finished writing the book, but we got together. It'd become a habit after about 3 years that time sort of didn't pass without me wanting to ask him some questions. And so I was at his house in a little duplex in LA. And we were sitting on the tiny balcony, and the dogs were padding in the yard below. And his daughter had just had her first baby, so he was a granddad for the second time. And I was asking him all these questions, and he looked at me with a very sweet face and said, "You know, can you ask Tom Waits these? He always gives so much good, better answers than I do." He could never be so rude to ask me to shut up. So here we were. And we were talking about work, which of course didn't stop for him after he came back from the tour. So he agreed that his work is driven, but he said, "I was never conscious of a choice. I don't really know what the choice was. It just seemed to be what I was doing from the beginning, and I was doing it all the time. And there's something about keeping a record of the thing. The idea that it might help you to keep a record of the approach to sanity. That somehow it could all become clearer. I was totally preoccupied with those matters. And my work? Well, you know that all you're doing, whatever you're doing, is as tiny as hell in the great scheme of things. But on the other hand, it's your work, so you treat it with respect. Outside of that, he said, there's really not much going on, and it's fine. You don't really want that much going on. You're just trying to finish a song. You know that you're going to leave pretty soon. This is not going to last forever. Your health isn't going to become more of a consideration. So I would like to bring as many things to completion as possible. And he was working hard, and he kept getting calls on the phone from the band that wanted him to go back on tour. And he really wanted to go back on tour, but the problem was now that Roshi Sasaki, the Zen teacher he was devoted to and had gone and lived next to in a hut on Mount Bordy for 5.5 years, was now 105 years old. And clearly Zen is good for you if you want to live a long life. And he was taking him backwards and forwards to the hospital all the time. So he said, I can't leave Roshi. And he told me that Roshi kept saying to him, oh, I'm so sorry, excuse me for not dying. And when it came around to writing the end of the book, the first edition of it, he said the same to me, because I did point out that if he died at the end of the tour or had exploded in his suit on stage, it would have been a perfect ending. It would have been a neat and tidy ending, and he was a neat and tidy kind of guy. But anyway, we talked about death, and that was something that Leonard never had a problem with. Not even over the years when I'd interviewed him as a music journalist, somehow death always seemed to come up in the subject, and it cheered him up enormously. So anyway, death was never a stranger to his conversation, his humor, or his work. Death had haunted Leonard's songs and poems from the beginning, and they'd come to some kind of amicable enough agreement decades ago. But he was right, it would have made a good ending. So we sat around discussing some other endings we could do. And I said, well, tell you what, do you still keep a record of everything? Do you still have a notebook in your pocket? And he gave me one of those slow, suspicious looks. And I said, well, turn it to the last page and we'll finish with whatever you wrote last. So he took it out of his pocket. It's very slowly, because everything he did was very slowly and deliberate. He kind of got to the last page, but then he cheated and went back a few pages. And then he poured me another glass of wine, and he read this. So you have to imagine now it's Leonard's voice. Dream last night. I heard that we were allowed to go into the women's room. I opened one door. It was the women's bathroom. I saw a woman taking off her makeup. I wasn't allowed in there, and I had no interest in staying. I hurried away. Another door. I opened it and slipped into a small room. Behind a separation, I could hear a young woman talking to a therapist. I wasn't really sure I was allowed in there, but I thought that the rules were somehow ambiguous, and if discovered, I could justify my presence. There was a narrow camp bed close to the door with fresh sheets and a light blanket. I snuggled into the bed and began to listen carefully to the confession the young woman was making to the therapist. I don't remember what she was saying, but she stopped abruptly and said, "Leonard Cohen is listening to us." They both came over to the bed. I pretended that I had been sleeping, not listening, and I pretended to slowly come awake, and I woke up in my hotel room, number 4904, in the Melbourne Sofitel. Are there any Jungians in the house? I'm sure somebody can tell us what the stream is about. Well, we'll go to another part of this last chapter. Leonard had come to terms with growing old, At that time, he was 79 when this interview happened. He called it, quote, one of the most compassionate ways there is of saying goodbye. And old age suited Leonard. The man in the suit and fedora seemed much more at home with himself than the young Leonard was. Where so many stories of the lives of musicians and poets have unhappy endings, Leonard found himself happier, more productive, better off, and more successful than he had ever been. He was at the top of his game. Old Ideas, one of his later albums, had topped the charts in 11 countries. Popular Problems, another late album, in 10, and the awards kept coming in. Leonard didn't really like many awards. He tended not to go to shows and send his son Adam, but one that he really liked was this one. It was the inaugural Penn Award for the song lyrics of literary excellence. And Leonard shared the prize with Chuck Berry. An email from Bob Dylan was read aloud at the ceremony, in which Bob called Chuck Berry the Shakespeare of rock and roll, and he called Leonard the Kafka of the blues, concluding, "Chuck, you have indeed written the book with a capital B, and congratulations to Leonard, who's still writing it." There was another new album underway, but though his mind was still sharp, Leonard's body betrayed him. Time and touring had taken its toll. There was no more skipping onto a stage or falling to his knees. He had multiple compression fractures of the spine. He was also fighting cancer. Immobilized by pain, in the words of a man of soldierly habits, he was, quote, confined to barracks. In July that year was 2016, word reached Leonard that Marianne Ilhan, we all know Marianne, probably everybody's favorite muse of Leonard's, Marianne was in a hospital in Oslo dying. She, like Leonard, had cancer, and like Leonard had kept her illness private. Leonard wrote back at once and tenderly, "Well, Marianne, it's come to this time when we are really so old, and our bodies are falling apart. And I think I will follow you very soon. Know that I am so close behind you that if you stretch out your hand, I think you can reach mine. And you know that I've always loved you for your beauty and your wisdom, but I don't need to say anything more about that because you know about that. But now I just want to wish you a very good journey. Goodbye, old friend. Endless love. See you down the road." 2 days later, Marianne lost consciousness and quietly slipped away. And Leonard would do the same in his bed at home 4 months later. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the lovely rock writers that have been listening to you tonight. Thank you.
Sylvie Simmons, everybody. And our final reader tonight emailed me with his book earlier this spring, and I thought it was just an amazing book. I read, I didn't tell you this, Michael. I read the whole fucking thing in one night. Okay, that's how good it was, and I'm not saying that because he also quoted a little bit of my punk book in it. I'm not saying that at all. It's just totally coincidental. But it's great to have him here to turn all of you onto this book, because it's a hell of a story, as you'll find out. So, I'm talking about Michael Goldberg. He's a writer and photographer. He was a senior editor at Rolling Stone, one of many Stone expats here tonight. For a decade, his writing has appeared in many publications, including Esquire, New Musical Express, Downbeat Vibe, and the San Francisco Chronicle. He has published 3 novels, and this year releases 2 new books, one of which is not even out yet, but he brought copies. So you can buy Addicted to Noise and Music Writings of Michael Goldberg here, even though nobody else can. That's kind of cool, right? But the book I'm talking about, and the book that is for sale here now, is Wicked Game, the true story of guitarist James Calvin Wilsey. It's a hell of a read. Thank you all for coming. Please welcome Michael Goldberg.
appreciate it. It's been great to be here with all these other writers who are so good. And thank you, Jack and Jane, for doing Litquake and for having this particular event. But the whole Litquake thing is fantastic. I'm going to read from Wicked Game, as Jack said. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. I'm going to read from this book, Wicked Game, that came out earlier this year. And this book is my new book that's coming out in November, which is a collection of writings from the past 47 years, interviews with people like Prince and Lou Reed and Patti Smith and Sleater Kinney and Brian Wilson and just all kinds of people. Chapter 1. Hey buddy, this is private property. It was a typical fall day, October 2018, and Ivana Manley was upset. Manley, the president of Manley Laboratories, producer of highly regarded high-end audio gear, had just found a man camping alongside her one-story stucco building in the sometimes bleak, suburban Eagle Rock neighborhood of Los Angeles, a neighborhood struggling to be middle class and failing. Occasionally, if you walk the streets of this working class neighborhood, as I did, you'd see a recently painted house with a neat yard, flowers, and trimmed grass. But other houses needed a paint job, and there were chain link fences, locked gates, and funky carports. Manley's building was less than 2 blocks from a homeless encampment under the CA 134 freeway. You could hear the drone of speeding automobiles. There were black metal security bars across all of her windows. Homeless people hung out near the building, walking onto her property, and after they were gone, she would find used needles and trash. A skinny man with a grizzled, mostly white beard lay on cardboard on the concrete walkway behind some shrubs along the left side of Manley's building, with all his stuff, bags of clothes and other things. When the man smiled, she could see he was missing teeth. He didn't look well. Hey buddy, this is private property, Manley told the man. You can't live here. There are shelters and things. You have to go somewhere else. Manley was frustrated that homeless people who came onto her property would leave a mess, and she'd have to waste her time cleaning up after them, only to find more trash to clean up days later. She felt sad for the homeless folks having to sleep outside, but all the drug use scared her, and she didn't want to be around it. She shooed the homeless man off. After he got to his feet, surprisingly, he cleaned up his trash, including the piece of cardboard he'd slept on before he left. He was humble and apologetic, Manley said. Another day, the man was back, and when Manley found him, she again told him to leave. As she stood waiting while he cleaned up his stuff, he looked at her, his mouth forming a mischievous smile, and in a quiet voice, "Hey, you're Manley, huh?" He mentioned the variable mu, a high-end limiter compressor, which is a piece of audio equipment that Manley's company made. "That's you, huh? I remember you from Gear Sluts." The haggard man was referring to an online forum that focuses on pro audio gear. Now Manley was confused. How did this homeless bum know about Gear Sluts? He can't be crazy, she thought. He's quoting Gear Sluts. When she confirmed that she was Ivana Manley, the man said, "Yeah, I know who you are." "Who are you?" she said. "What's your name?" The man looked at her, another mischievous smile, and that quiet voice. "It's James Wilsey." Later that day, a Google search revealed the man had once been Chris Isaac's guitar player. He played in Isaac's band, Silvertone, an international hit. Though it was hard to imagine, the homeless addict trespassing on Manley's property had once been much more than Chris Isaac's guitar player. It was Jimmy Wilsey who wrote and played the haunting introductory guitar riff for Isaac's Wicked Game, an international hit in 1991 that charted in the top 10 in 10 countries, including the United States. But that was 27 years ago. Still, for Jimmy, strung out on dope, it sometimes seemed like yesterday. He could recall what it was like when he stood on concert stages, playing to thousands of rapturous fans. Jimmy was more than a guitar player, more than a musician. He was an extraordinary creative, the guitar being the medium through which he expressed that creativity. And for nearly all his years as an addict, even after he was seduced by the siren drug heroin and entered into the relationship that trumped all others for more than half his life, he continued to create sounds of exquisite beauty, some of which provided great pleasure to listeners, and some, like Deadly Nightshade, took us to previously unknown depths of darkness and despair. The sounds could be gentle, a gentle caress, or a ruthless knife to the heart. Jimmy's story is the story of the American dream, which always contains both the dream and the nightmare. Who among us hasn't wished, at some time in their life, for fame and fortune, for a life free of worry and pain and filled with happiness, a life free of all the mundane day-to-day that most of us are saddled with? Certainly Jimmy did. When he was a high school student in 1974, he repeatedly told a friend he, quote, wanted to be a rock star, and he, quote, was going to be rich and famous someday. Jimmy, actually he was Jim then, grew up an Air Force brat, moving from place to place to place before he turned 12, until his family settled in a soulless Missouri suburb of St. Louis, where he eventually plotted his future as an artist. At 19, he made his great escape, landing in San Francisco, and in little over a year, reinvented himself, Jay Gatz-like, first as a star at the center of the city's small but growing punk scene, and then briefly as an international rock star, before it all went wrong, leaving him to live out the rest of his life in semi-obscurity, attempting unsuccessfully to restart his music career, struggling with drug addiction, spending his final months on the street, homeless. The dream of stardom, or success of some kind, the nightmare of losing it, and worse. Isn't that a version of the American dream in all its most tragic dimensions? If you've read F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender as the Night, you could think of Jimmy as the Dick Diver of rock, if you added heroin to the mix. Fucked up on heroin. Until recently, Jimmy had been living a few blocks southwest of Manley's building in a 2-story rectangular-shaped brown house on Genevieve Avenue near Leola Street. He'd been fucked up on heroin and other serious drugs much of the time he lived there. He'd shared the house with his ex-wife, and by the time they were evicted, as many as 6 other people, including at least 2 druggies. Homeless people and other stoners were in and out of the place at all hours of the day and night. At times, there were police cars, red lights flashing, sirens blaring in the street in front of the house. In early September, the police cars were joined by a police helicopter hovering overhead as paramedics wheeled a gurney out of the house and loaded a man into an ambulance. Neighbors described the place as a drug house and said drug dealing had been going on there for months. In late September, all the residents of the house were evicted, including Jimmy, who began living in his car, a fading Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor. It had died days before the eviction. In order not to have it towed, street people would help him push it to new parking spaces around the neighborhood. One day, after some homeless folk helped Jimmy move the car, a nurse came out of a house across the street from where he was parked to see what Jimmy was doing there. She could see he looked yellow from jaundice, and after he told her he'd had a liver transplant 4 years earlier, she called the paramedics. He was in the hospital for about a week, then discharged and back on the street. He called many of his old friends, asking if he could crash at their house or apartment, but no one wanted to house a person addicted to hard drugs, even if he had been a close friend once. Quote, I got messages weeks later from friends freaked out about him leaving incoherent phone messages about being in need of a place to stay. Bill Sankey, who had been Wilsey's best friend in the late 90s and early 2000s, said. Manley felt compassion for the former rock star guitarist. She would bring him hot tea and food, and they would talk. One time she made him a bag of popcorn. Quote, he was always very sweet and kind and considerate, she said, but I also know with addicts, you cannot rely on them, and I had to keep him at arm's length. Wilsey told Manley about his 14-year-old son, Waylon, and some of his hopes and dreams. He was excited about seeing his son, she said. He did see his son in those last couple months. He was full of optimism. He wanted to open a studio. He wanted to go somewhere and buy a house. He had all these plans. He wanted to write music. He was enthused about that. Still, despite Wilsey's big plans, day after day, Manley kept finding him sleeping on cardboard on the cold, hard concrete walkway. He was wasting away right in front of her as the months passed. I watched him get emaciated, she recalled. He was losing weight like crazy. He was a skeleton. By December, there was a chill in the air. The nights were cold and it occasionally rained. One Tuesday morning, Manley found him lying on his cardboard bed. His eyes and skin were yellow. He'd stopped taking the anti-rejection drugs he'd been prescribed for his liver. "Jimmy, what's going on here, man? You've got to get some help," Manley said. Jimmy weakly replied, "Yeah, I know." At 6 p.m. on December 18th, 2018, Manley called 911. An ambulance arrived and the paramedics helped Jimmy up and gave him some oxygen. Quote, "His pants were falling right off his hips," Manley said. "He couldn't get up. He was so weak at that point. He was so skinny because he hadn't been eating, probably just shooting up, lying there for who knows how long. I saw him off on the ambulance." The ambulance brought the guitarist to an LA hospital. His organs were in distress and were shutting down. He was put on life support to try to help his liver with dialysis, but nothing was working. 3 days before Christmas, Chris Isaac's bassist, Roland Sally, who had played in Silvertone with Jimmy for 8 years, headed for the hospital and found Jimmy in a coma. Another of his friends, Liz McGrath, was there. "I'd driven to the LA hospital to see him," Sally said. "I took my ukulele, fully expecting to walk into the room, sit down, talk some turkey and catch up, even play a few songs. Such was not the case." The morning of December 24, Jimmy's health tanked. His body was rejecting his liver transplant. His blood pressure spiked, and he had a heart attack. His sisters and niece, who were in Arizona, they planned to fly to LA and see Jimmy right after Christmas, got a call from a doctor who had said Jimmy wasn't going to survive, and they should make, quote, final arrangements. That afternoon, artist-singer McGrath, who had known Jimmy for 20 years, and a few others, including his beloved son Waylon, were with Jimmy in his hospital room, where he remained in a coma. McGrath had decorated the room with Christmas cards with messages she had written on them after Jimmy's friends texted their best wishes for him. One of Jimmy's visitors found Wicked Game on their iPhone and held the phone close to Jimmy's ear. As the first notes of Jimmy's unforgettable guitar intro played from the tiny, tinny speakers, a tear rolled down his face. Quote, "Up until this point, he hadn't moved for 3 days," McGrath said. His eyes had been wide open, not even a blink, till he heard that song. James Calvin Wilsey, age 61, died of overall organ failure at exactly 4:20 p.m., Christmas Eve day. It was a bleak end to a life that had once seemed so promising. Thank you. So I know that first chapter is such a bummer, but I can tell you that there's a lot of the book that is not such a bummer. I mean, it talks about when Jimmy came to San Francisco, the whole San Francisco punk scene, and the book is really kind of the story of Jimmy, the story of the punk scene in the late 70s, the story of the Avengers, the punk band Jimmy was in, the story of Silvertone, which he was in with Chris Isaak for 12 years, and really it's kind of also the story of the dark side of rock and roll. So I hope you'll check it out. I'm really proud of it. Thank you for being here. Thanks so much.
Michael Goldberg, everybody. The story of Jimmy Wilsey. Wow. When you hear that song, Wicked Game, those first few guitar notes, amazing. Thank you all for coming so much. This means so much to us, to the writers. Your support really helps everybody, continue creating these works and writing about music. So, I don't have anything else to say. It's just it was just awesome that all of you came here and listened to everybody tonight. How about a final hand for all the authors? Nadine, Ben, Greil, Sylvie, Rickey, Michael. I'm forgetting somebody. Shit. But anyway, and Ben was here. Yeah. It was great. Great night. Thank you.